Dennis had just finished hanging the last string of lights along his porch when the call came. The December wind nipped at his collar as he stepped inside, cheeks flushed with the kind of hopeful anticipation only holidays could bring. For 5 years he had footed the bills, paid the mortgage, and kept their fantasy alive while living a modest truth of his own. He expected gratitude, maybe even an invitation. What he got instead was exclusion. His son's voice came through with the precision of a business memo, cold and final. Isabella's parents would be visiting. Their traditions would not align. It would be best if he did not come. Dennis listened in silence. Then he hung up, walked to the kitchen, and poured himself a coffee he could barely taste. Around him stood the reminders of every dollar he had poured into a house he would never truly be welcome in. Outside, Christmas lights blinked on. Inside, something older and colder switched off. He reached for the folder he had not touched in months and opened it. If you've ever given everything to people who gave you nothing back, like, share, and subscribe. Comment below. Have you ever cut someone off just to reclaim your peace? And let me know. Where are you watching from? Dennis had just finished hanging the last string of lights along his porch when the call came. The December wind nipped at his collar as he stepped inside, cheeks flushed with the kind of hopeful anticipation only holidays could bring. For 5 years he had footed the bills, paid the mortgage, and kept their fantasy alive while living a modest truth of his own. He expected gratitude, maybe even an invitation. What he got instead was exclusion. His son's voice came through with the precision of a business memo, cold and final. Isabella's parents would be visiting. Their traditions would not align. It would be best if he did not come. Dennis listened in silence. Then he hung up, walked to the kitchen, and poured himself a coffee he could barely taste. Around him stood the reminders of every dollar he had poured into a house he would never truly be welcome in. Outside, Christmas lights blinked on. Inside, something older and colder switched off. He reached for the folder he had not touched in months and opened it. The folder was thick, yellowing at the edges, its corners softened by years of moving from drawer to drawer without purpose. Inside were documents that told the truth he had tried to ignore. Monthly transfers, mortgage schedules, property tax receipts. Every line item was a fingerprint of sacrifice. Dennis sat at the kitchen table with the folder open in front of him. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the heater and the occasional creak of settling beams. Maria's photo still sat on the mantel, her soft smile watching over a room that had once echoed with laughter. Now it was filled with something else entirely. Realization. He started adding the numbers. $2,800 every month for 60 months. $168,000. Add the down payment, $47,000. Add the new kitchen appliances, another $18,000. Holiday expenses, emergency funds, bridge loans for job losses. The total was approaching $250,000. It had been easy not to look too closely before. Love had a way of making numbers blurry, but now the fog had cleared. The truth stared back at him in ink and paper. He closed the folder slowly and set his mug down beside it. The coffee had gone cold. He reached for his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the one labeled Mortgage Transfer Autopay. A quiet voice answered after 2 rings. The request was simple: cancel the monthly payment. Effective immediately. There was a pause. Then confirmation. Dennis hung up and sat back in his chair, hands folded. For the first time in years, his budget would balance next month. It felt like taking a deep breath after being underwater too long. He rose from the table and walked to the front window. The lights on the houses across the street twinkled in the early evening dark. Inside those homes, families were probably decorating trees, setting out cookies, sharing warmth. His home was silent, but something in that silence had shifted. The invitation had not come, but something else had. Clarity. He stood at the threshold of his living room, staring at the place where the tree used to be. He had not bothered to set one up this year, not since Maria passed, not since Michael stopped calling regularly. Not since Isabella began treating him like background noise at family events. His eyes landed on the bookshelf where the albums were stored. He pulled one out and flipped through the pages slowly. Pictures of a younger Michael building snowmen, unwrapping presents, falling asleep in Maria's lap after too much dessert. The years had slipped by like warm breath on cold glass. Dennis returned the album to the shelf and walked to his desk in the corner of the room. He opened another drawer and pulled out a second folder. This one thinner, newer. It was labeled simply Evidence. Inside were printed emails, screenshots of text messages, a few receipts that had been sent without thanks. He added the bank documents from the first folder, then sealed it shut. Not out of anger, out of order. The decision had been made. In the hours that followed, Dennis made no phone calls, sent no messages. He cooked himself a simple dinner, washed the dishes by hand, and changed the bulb on the porch light that had been flickering for weeks. The small repairs brought a strange satisfaction, like reclaiming inches of a life that had been shrinking beneath the weight of invisible obligations. He sat in his recliner with a blanket draped across his knees, watching the fire in the hearth flicker against the walls. A sense of calm settled over him. Not happiness, but peace. A rare and unfamiliar peace. Somewhere across town, his son and daughter-in-law were likely finalizing centerpieces and seat assignments, preparing for the arrival of Isabella's parents, ensuring every detail was picture-perfect. Except for one, the man who had paid for the floor beneath their feet would not be there to admire it, and soon they would feel that absence in a way they never expected. The next morning, Dennis opened a blank notebook. At the top of the first page, he wrote 2 words in block letters: Operation Closure. The first full day after Dennis canceled the mortgage payment unfolded in slow, deliberate motions. The morning. Sun touched the edges of the frost-covered windows, casting cold shadows across the living room floor. Dennis sat at the kitchen table, a yellow legal pad in front of him, the same pad Maria used to make shopping lists and budget plans. He drew a line down the middle and labeled one column what I gave and the other what they took. His handwriting was neat, slow, exact. He began with the obvious: $2,800 per month for 5 years. $168,000. Then the down payment, $47,000, borrowed from a second mortgage on his own home. The kitchen renovation had been another $18,000 charged to a credit card he had not used since Maria passed. Dennis paused, then added an entry labeled Furniture Essentials, $7,000 for a new sectional, matching ottoman, and a farmhouse dining table that Isabella insisted was required for adult entertaining. He flipped the page and continued. Emergency expenses, utility bailouts, medical copays when Michael's insurance lapsed, grocery runs when Isabella's boutique was in a slow month. All undocumented, all unreciprocated, all forgotten. By noon, he had listed over $230,000, and not one holiday invitation to show for it. Dennis leaned back in his chair, staring at the numbers. There had been no gratitude, no acknowledgement, just expectation, as if the support he provided was not love, but obligation. His throat tightened as he looked around his modest kitchen, the outdated microwave, the fridge that hummed too loudly, the scratched linoleum floor Maria had meant to replace one day. He had told himself they were manageable sacrifices, temporary, necessary. Now they felt like evidence. He stood and opened a drawer beneath the counter, pulling out the envelope that held his latest retirement statement. The number had barely changed in 2 years. Each contribution he had intended to make had vanished into someone else's mortgage, someone else's grocery list, someone else's pride. Dennis returned to the table, added a new section to his legal pad, and titled it, What It Cost Me. Retirement, medical savings, home repairs, dignity. He stopped writing and added one more word. Maria. The first year after her death had blurred by in paperwork and silence. Michael and Isabella had visited a few times. Each time Isabella had seemed uncomfortable in his home. She never commented on the pictures of Maria still hanging in the hallway. She rarely touched her food. The last time she had brought her own throw pillow and insisted on using it in the guest room. Dennis had ignored the signs. He had been too numb, too hopeful. He thought supporting them financially would keep him close to Michael. That love, even unspoken, would eventually be returned. It never was. His phone buzzed on the counter, a reminder to refill his prescription. He walked over, canceled the notification, and opened a separate app. His bank account was lighter than he remembered. He scrolled through the history, watching the pattern repeat itself over and over. 2,800. 15th of every month. Line after line of generosity in the language of numbers. This month would be the first in 60 where the transaction would not appear. He stared at the empty space between his fingers, then set the phone down and returned to the notebook. He had made a decision. But decisions without plans were just emotions. That evening he opened his laptop, not to check the news or read emails or look at photos. This time, he opened a blank document and titled it Operation Closure. He began by copying every monthly transfer from his bank. Then he attached each supporting document, each receipt, each invoice, each forwarded email that began with, "Could you help us out?" and ended with, "Thanks in advance." They read like requests to a bank, not a father. By midnight, Dennis had created a timeline spanning 5 years. It showed the quiet consistency of his giving and the increasing boldness of their taking. It was not enough to cancel the mortgage. They needed to know he remembered everything. He saved the document, printed a copy, and slipped it into a clean manila folder. This was not rage, it was record-keeping. The next morning, he walked to the local print shop and ordered 12 more copies. The young woman behind the counter smiled as she handed him the receipt. He smiled back. "Paid in full," he said. The phrase felt good in his mouth. Back home, Dennis opened a drawer in his desk that had remained untouched for over a year. Inside was Maria's old camera, the one she used for family gatherings and holidays. He wiped the dust from the lens, charged the battery, and tested the shutter. Still worked. He snapped a photo of the folder, then one of his fireplace, then one of the empty dining table. Then he set the camera down and picked up his phone. There was still more to do. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, Dennis walked out to his truck, started the engine, and sat in the warmth for a moment. He looked at the dashboard, remembering the miles he had driven for Michael. Airport pickups, grocery runs, errands when they were too busy, his gas, his time. The next time they asked for a ride, he would give them silence. He turned off the ignition, stepped back into the house, and flipped the legal pad to a clean page. At the top, he wrote what they will learn and began writing. At the bottom of the page, one last line, underlined twice. This story will end in my house, not theirs. The day after Dennis finalized the evidence packets was quiet, the kind of winter silence that makes even the sound of boiling water feel loud. He spent the morning cleaning, not because he expected visitors, but because it brought order to a world that had finally started making sense again. The radio played oldies in the background as he wiped down countertops, organized his spice rack, and vacuumed beneath furniture that had not been moved in years. By mid-afternoon, the house gleamed. He poured himself a second cup of coffee and settled into his recliner with the crossword puzzle. 7 across. Delayed gratification. 12 letters. He stared at the blank spaces and let the question sit without urgency. The answer would come. His phone rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. Isabella. The name on the screen pulsed like a warning light. He let it ring twice before answering, his voice calm and unbothered. Her tone was clipped, transactional. She needed a favor. Her parents were flying in from Portland. Their flight would land in Spokane at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Could he pick them up? Dennis sipped his coffee and listened. There was no apology for Christmas, no acknowledgement of the uninvited silence he had been handed like a folded napkin. Just expectation again. He waited until she had finished her list of instructions before responding. Did she remember their last conversation? He asked it casually, as if asking if she had remembered to defrost the turkey. Isabella sighed dramatically, brushing it off as a misunderstanding. Her parents were traditional, she said. They expected a certain tone at the dinner table. Surely Dennis could understand that. He did. He understood perfectly. He agreed to the pickup, asked what airline, wrote down the flight number, confirmed the time. He promised to be there. She thanked him with a distracted tone as if checking a box, then hung up. Dennis placed the phone on the table beside his coffee and smiled. It was the first time in years he had made a promise he had no intention of keeping. That evening he cleaned out the truck, not because anyone would ride in it tomorrow, but because he wanted it to feel like his again. He threw away the old receipts, wiped down the dashboard, and topped off the windshield fluid. As he closed the driver's side door, he looked at the passenger seat and shook his head. They really thought he would keep playing along. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Sunlight broke through the clouds, lighting up the frost on the rooftops like glitter. Dennis dressed in a soft flannel shirt, boiled water for tea, and sat with his newspaper. By 2:15 p.m., he was on his second cup. The crossword from the day before lay finished on the table. 12-letter word for delayed gratification, postponement. His phone buzzed at 2:21 p.m. Isabella, then again at 2:36. Her father's number, then again at 2:47. He ignored them all. Outside, his neighbor's kids were building a snow fort, their laughter filling the air with something Dennis had not heard in years: joy without obligation, presence without performance. At 3:30, Dennis brewed a fresh pot of tea and began organizing the kitchen junk drawer. He found a miniature flashlight, a broken tape measure, 3 batteries that no longer held a charge. He threw away the useless and kept what worked. A cleansing ritual of sorts. The 7th call came at 3:45 p.m. A different number. Probably someone at the airport letting him know they were stranded. He silenced the ring and placed the phone face down. By 4:15, he had unplugged the landline. By 4:20, the house was filled with peace. For dinner, he made himself a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup. Comfort food, real food, not plated illusions served at a table built on lies. The cheese browned to golden perfection. The soup steamed in his favorite mug, the one with the tiny chip on the handle from Maria's first attempt at ceramic painting. He ate slowly, savoring the flavor and the silence. By 5, he had cleaned the dishes, wiped the counters, and returned to his recliner with a glass of water. The sun had already set. Shadows stretched long across his backyard. In another home across town, 3 people were likely standing in an airport parking garage, arguing about cab fare and wondering how their servant had failed them. At 5:48 p.m., the pounding began, not a knock. Pounding, aggressive, rhythmic, demanding. Dennis walked slowly to the door, tea in hand, already knowing what he would see. Through the peephole, 3 figures crowded his porch: Cody Jenkins, Catherine, Isabella. He opened the door and stepped back without a word. Cody stormed in first, red-faced and furious. Catherine followed, her lips pursed so tight they barely looked human. Isabella came last, dragging her pride behind her like a train on a dress that no longer fit. Dennis remained by the door, sipping his tea. They yelled Cody first, accusations, fury, betrayal. Catherine joined in with words like inappropriate and elderly and disgraceful. Isabella added her crescendo of humiliation and damage. Dennis listened, then spoke. "Get out." They froze. Cody jabbed a finger in his direction but stopped short of touching him. Catherine began a monologue about social consequences and reputational damage. Isabella sneered something about respect and loyalty. Dennis held the door open wider. "This is my house." Silence. Cody's face darkened, his voice low now. Threats about connections, about social standing, about making life difficult. Dennis nodded once. Noted. Isabella urged her parents to leave, her voice cracking as she struggled to keep the scene from spiraling further. They filed out, Cody turning back at the last second to deliver one final warning. "You will regret this." Dennis closed the door and turned the deadbolt. The silence returned. He walked back to his chair, picked up his tea, and looked out the window. The rental car pulled away. 3 silhouettes bickering beneath the glow of Christmas lights they could not see from where they stood. He took a sip and felt nothing but calm. The storm would come, but it would not be his to fear. 3 days after the confrontation on his doorstep, Dennis woke early. The sky was still dark, and the ground outside was coated with a delicate crust of frost. His tea brewed quietly in the background as he prepared for the ritual he had followed every morning for over 30 years. Newspaper, tea, silence. He sat at the kitchen table with the mug warming his palms, flipped open the paper, and turned to page 3 without thinking. His breath caught. There it was. His name, his face. A photo from his business website, one he had not updated in years, stared back at him above the headline, "Spokane businessman abandons elderly couple at airport during holiday storm." Dennis sat frozen, hands wrapped around the mug, the heat no longer reaching his fingers. He read the opening line again and again, each repetition dulling the edge only slightly. The article told a clean, curated story. Cody and Catherine Jenkins, both in their late 50s, had been stranded for hours at Spokane International Airport during a holiday storm while awaiting a promised ride from their family member. The phrase family member was repeated enough times to make its implication feel sharp. According to the article, Dennis Flores had ignored calls. He had left them alone during dangerous weather conditions. The word cruel was used, so was erratic. A quote from Cody described the incident as traumatizing and reckless. There was no mention of Isabella's rejection, no context for the years of financial sacrifice, no mention of the silent banishment Dennis had received from the very family he had sustained. The photo showed a tired-looking man in grayscale, jaw set too tight, eyes too blank. A villain. He read the article again, this time slower, looking for names. The byline belonged to Patricia Morrison, lifestyle editor. He did not recognize her name, but he recognized the playbook. Cody had called in a favor, maybe through a contact at the bank, maybe through someone on a board he sat on. Influence leveraged like a club, reputation turned into a weapon. Dennis folded the paper with surgical precision and placed it to the side. So they had made the first move. For the first time in days, he felt the stirrings of something fierce behind his ribs. Not anger, not fear. Focus. He rose, walked to his desk, and turned on his laptop. He searched the writer first. Patricia Morrison, degree in journalism from a state university. 15 years at the local paper. Lifestyle editor for 7. Her contact information was public. So were her recent articles, product reviews, local restaurant spotlights, personal interest pieces about seasonal home decor. This was a woman whose beat was aesthetics and social climbing. He scanned her social media. Photos with influencers, charity events, champagne flutes raised in celebration. Nothing about the storm. Nothing about the article that now defined his name. Then he searched for Cody again. First National Bank retired manager. Member of Spokane Country Club. Treasurer for a local business alliance. Photos of ribbon cuttings, fundraisers, handshakes with city council members. A man who moved in small-town power circles. A man whose currency was perception. The smear piece made sense now. It had never been about Dennis as a person. It had been about Dennis as a problem, something to discredit before the truth caught up. He turned to Isabella's profile next. Her posts were public, always had been. She lived for visibility. There were pictures of their home, photos of their dog in seasonal sweaters, snapshots of table settings prepared for the upcoming Christmas dinner. The captions were drenched in curated wholesomeness. Our home, our family, our traditions. Dennis opened his evidence folder. He matched a receipt for granite countertops to a photo of Isabella standing beside them with a wine glass in hand. The caption read, finally upgraded to something worthy of dinner guests. His cursor hovered. He opened a new folder and labeled it. Exhibit A1 by 1. He matched financial records to social media moments. The $2,800 mortgage payments lined up with posts about new patio furniture, kitchen remodels, vacation getaways. Every picture they had proudly shared told the real story. Someone else paid the bill. He printed screenshots. He printed statements. He compiled every receipt and added captions beneath them in bold type. Paid for by Dennis Flores. By noon, he had filled an entire binder. The next step was mapping the timeline. He laid it all out, month by month, a ledger of generosity slowly warped into exploitation. He highlighted moments where Dennis had said yes while they treated him like a line item. Every act of giving, every insult that followed, Isabella's texts, Cody's disdain, Catherine's barbed comments about Maria's cooking and Dennis's background. He took a break, made himself a sandwich, and returned to the desk with renewed focus. It was not enough to know the truth. The truth needed weight, structure, presentation. He opened a new document and began writing a letter, not to a newspaper, not to a lawyer, to 12 people. He had seen the guest list for the Christmas dinner. Isabella had posted it with excitement a week earlier. Family, friends, neighbors, members of their social circle. Dennis wrote each name at the top of a page. Then he printed 12 more copies of the evidence binder. This would not be a press release. It would be a direct transmission. He printed a second copy of the article. Red ink in hand, he began annotating: lie, false, missing context, misleading phrasing. By the end, the article was a map of dishonesty. He added it to each packet. The sun dipped lower. The house grew darker, but Dennis did not reach for the light switch. He sat in the gathering shadows and looked at what he had assembled. Not revenge, not yet, just accountability. He walked to the living room, turned on the fireplace, and sat on the floor with the packets stacked neatly beside him. This story had been taken from him once. It would not be taken again, and this time, the ending would be his to write. Christmas Eve arrived dressed in winter's finest, blanketing Spokane in a soft hush of cold. The streets were lined with glowing wreaths, the air scented with wood smoke and peppermint. Most homes shimmered with warm light and familiar laughter. But at one house in Kendall Yards, preparations were being made for something different. Something curated. Something expensive. Dennis stood by his front window that evening, watching the final sliver of sun sink behind the rooftops. In his hands, he held a leather briefcase, old, worn, and filled with the weight of 5 years of truth. Inside were 12 carefully constructed packets, each labeled with the name of a dinner guest, each one a mirror held to a lie. He dressed deliberately. Navy blue suit, crisp white shirt, the tie Maria had chosen for him 10 Christmases ago. He had worn it to her funeral. He wore it again now, not for grief, but for closure. At 6:45 p.m., Dennis pulled up to the curb across from the Jenkins florist residence. The driveway overflowed with luxury cars. Guests milled inside, sipping wine and admiring the holiday spread. From where he stood, Dennis could see Isabella in the dining room, gesturing with a bottle of champagne. Michael laughed at something near the tree. Cody and Catherine held court by the fireplace, nodding along to a guest's story. All of them unaware. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. Security, like gratitude, was something they had never needed to worry about. Dennis stepped inside. The warmth hit him first. Then the scent. Cranberry glaze, buttered rolls, imported pine. Conversations drifted into laughter as guests turned toward the unexpected arrival. 12 faces caught in the act of comfort. Silence followed. Dennis walked in calmly, briefcase in hand, nodding once at his son. Michael's face drained of color. Isabella set her wine glass down slowly. Cody blinked twice. Catherine took a half step back. "Good evening," Dennis said with practiced calm. "I hope you do not mind me joining your celebration." He stepped toward the marble sideboard and opened his briefcase with a soft click. Inside, 12 packets waited, each one thick with paper, proof, and uncomfortable memory. One by one, he handed them out. Some guests hesitated, others accepted out of habit. Curiosity bloomed around the table. Pages turned. Expressions changed. The room shifted. "This," Dennis said quietly, "is a record of the last 5 years. Mortgage payments, renovations, emergency funds, grocery bills, bailouts, Christmas gifts, all paid from my account. All while I was being quietly excluded." A woman in pearls frowned, reading faster. Isabella's voice cracked first. "This is not what it looks like." Dennis pulled a second document from the briefcase. The newspaper article. Annotated, highlighted, underlined in red. "Let us also talk about this," he continued, holding up a copy. "The story that painted me as a senile man who left elderly guests in the cold. The story planted by Cody Jenkins using his contacts in the business community. A lie circulated in the city paper without a single attempt to verify it." The table was silent. A man with silver hair, seated at the far end, looked from his packet to Cody. "Did you really do this?" Cody opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Catherine tried next. "This is completely inappropriate." "You are ruining a holiday dinner." Dennis nodded slowly. "I was told I was not welcome for Christmas. This seems consistent." Isabella stepped forward, eyes wild now. "This is our home. You cannot just—" "Actually," Dennis said, interrupting, "I paid for your down payment. I paid for the kitchen you cooked this meal in. I paid for the chairs your guests are sitting in. For 5 years I have funded a performance, one where I was never allowed a speaking role." Michael's voice came from the corner of the room, quiet, uncertain. "Dad." Dennis turned to him. "I warned you, Michael. I warned you the day you said I would not be welcome at your table. This is not vengeance. It is visibility. People deserve to know who paid the price for the fantasy they have been admiring." A woman seated beside Catherine closed her folder. Her expression was unreadable. She looked at Cody, then Isabella, then back to Dennis. "I do not know what I expected tonight," she said, "but it certainly was not this." Dennis turned to the room one last time. "I am not staying. I only came to return the narrative to its rightful owner. The truth. Everything else is yours to deal with." He closed his briefcase, straightened his tie, and turned toward the door. Behind him, voices rose, questions, protests, confusion. The facade they had built with his money began to crack. The perfect dinner, unraveling one paper at a time. He stepped out into the cold air and closed the door behind him. Silence wrapped around him like a coat. As he reached his truck, he heard one voice, faint but clear, call after him. "Dad." He paused, but did not turn back. The morning after Christmas, Dennis woke with no alarm, no schedule, and no need to check his bank account for once. The house was still, wrapped in the kind of post-holiday quiet only solitude can deliver. Outside, the neighborhood shimmered with the leftover magic of lights and snow, but inside, Dennis felt a new kind of peace, a silence that no longer felt like exile. It felt earned. He moved slowly through the morning. Boiled water, toasted bread, sat at the table with his tea. There were no calls, no messages, only the soft clink of his spoon against ceramic. Then around 9, the doorbell rang. He opened it to find a certified letter waiting on his doorstep, tucked neatly into a red and white envelope. A delivery slip hung beneath it, requiring no signature. The sender was clear, Wells Fargo Mortgage Services. Dennis brought it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and opened it with a calm hand. The letter inside was short, precise, and cold. Notice of default. 3 months unpaid. Final demand for payment. 14 days to bring the account current or face foreclosure proceedings. He read it once, then again, then set it down beside his teacup. The house in question was not his. It was theirs. But his name was still tethered to it, co-signed 5 years ago in a moment of misguided trust. It had been meant as a launchpad, a gift, a hand up. Instead, it had become an anchor, and now it was sinking. Dennis sat at the table for a long while, watching the snow melt along the window panes. His phone vibrated against the counter. Once, then again Isabella's name. Cody's, Catherine's, blocked. He stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulled down the binder he had constructed in December, and placed the letter inside the front cover. Exhibit 13. The rest of the day passed slowly. He read a novel from Maria's old collection, took a walk around the neighborhood, and fixed the loose handle on the front door. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke, and for the first time in years he had no obligations. That evening he poured a small glass of whiskey and sat by the fire. The embers cracked softly, casting a warm orange hue across the room. The calm felt earned, not borrowed. At 6:32 p.m., the knock came, firm, familiar, rhythmic. He opened the door. Michael stood on the porch, wearing the same suit he had worn on Christmas Eve. It was wrinkled now, his tie crooked, his shoes dusted with salt and snow, his eyes sunken from too little sleep and too many truths. Dennis stepped aside. Michael entered without a word, taking in the house with a long, slow glance. The new paint on the walls, the repaired light fixtures, the recliner that was no longer sagging. He sat on the couch like a man waiting for a verdict. "Dad," he said finally, "we need to talk." Dennis sat across from him, said nothing. "The house is in foreclosure," Michael admitted. "I know," Dennis replied. "We cannot make the payments without—" He trailed off, catching himself before saying the words. "Without you," Dennis leaned back in his chair, hands folded. "Do you know how much money I gave you, Michael?" Michael nodded slowly. Isabella calculated it. "Mortgage payments, down payment, the kitchen, everything. Over $237,000, Dennis said. "I added it all up. I kept the receipts. I kept the messages. I kept the silence." Michael rubbed his eyes, exhaustion radiating from him like heat. "I let them talk me into things I knew were wrong. I let them shape how I treated you. I did not know about the newspaper article until it was printed. I swear I did not. Dennis let the words hang in the air. They said things about Mom, Michael whispered, about how she knew her place, about how she did not embarrass them. A pulse of heat passed through Dennis's chest, but he remained still. I should have defended you, Michael said. I should have defended her. I should have said no years ago. Dennis studied his son's face, saw the boy he raised buried beneath layers of regret, saw the man he had funded into comfort, saw the man who let it happen. The house, Michael said, we are going to lose everything. Isabella's respect, her parents' approval. I do not know what to do. Dennis spoke quietly. You will figure it out. The same way I figured out how to survive Christmas alone. The same way I figured out how to stop financing people who treat me like a burden. Michael's eyes filled. He wiped them quickly, ashamed of the softness he once mocked in his father. I lost you, did I not? Dennis looked at him for a long moment. No, Michael. You gave me away. Michael stood, paced, sat again. Is there any chance we could start over? Rebuild? Dennis considered the question. I forgave you months ago. But forgiveness is not the same as restoration. Forgiveness does not mean pretending it never happened. It means I am done carrying it. Michael nodded. What about the house? It is not my problem anymore. So that is it. You're a grown man. Figure it out like grown men do. Sell the house. Get a smaller one. Get a job that pays enough to live on. Stop living beyond your means and expecting someone else to patch the hole. Michael stood again, then paused at the door. One last thing, he said, his voice thick with something between shame and pride. Seeing you stand up for yourself at dinner, I was proud of you. Dennis smiled faintly. Good. Maybe there is hope for you yet. Michael left. Dennis poured another whiskey, stepped out onto his porch, and watched the snow fall in soft spirals through the streetlight glow. It had been 5 years since Maria passed. 5 years of being useful but invisible. That time was over. His phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. Dinner Sunday. The kids want to show you their school projects. Dennis typed back. Would not miss it. By the end of the week, the whispers had begun. What started as a dinner party disruption had bloomed into something larger, messier, and far harder to contain. In a city the size of Spokane, reputation was currency, and people spent it recklessly when they believed their accounts would never be audited. Cody and Katherine Jenkins had wagered everything on social standing. Now they were watching it erode like cheap stone under a hard winter wind. Dennis did not have to make calls. He did not have to post online or issue statements. The packets he handed out at dinner had done the work for him. Word spread without effort. It always did when the story involved wealth, deception, and an unexpected hero. 3 days after the confrontation, a friend of Maria's from the local library called him. She had not spoken to him in years, not since the memorial service. But she had heard what happened. She had read the article. Then she had heard the truth. I always knew you were too good for how they treated you, she said. 2 days later, Dennis received a call from a man who served with him on a community improvement board back in the early 2000s. The man apologized for believing the paper without asking questions, said he had spoken to Patricia Morrison himself, said she was not taking calls anymore. Then came the letters, one from a neighbor he barely knew, thanking him for standing up against what he called social predation. One from a former employee who had seen the newspaper article and recognized the name. Thank you for giving me a job when no one else would. The note read, You paid my rent for 3 months after my mom got sick. I never forgot that. Dennis folded each letter carefully and placed them in the top drawer of his desk. He did not need them to feel validated, but he saved them anyway. On Saturday, he walked to the local market for groceries. The clerk behind the counter, a young man with a half-finished tattoo sleeve and an awkward smile, gave him a quiet nod as he rang up the items. As Dennis paid, the young man spoke softly. My dad said, what you did took guts. Dennis smiled, nodded, and walked home with his groceries held against his chest like a shield. He knew not everyone believed him. There were still side eyes from people loyal to the Jenkins name. Still murmurs about how it all seemed a little too dramatic. But for every doubter, there were 2 more who said nothing, just offered a respectful glance or a longer pause in conversation. The power was shifting, and Dennis had done nothing but tell the truth. The real blow came 1 week later when a follow-up column appeared in the Spokane Review, not by Patricia Morrison. By her editor, it was short, it was polite, and it was devastating. We regret that the piece published on December 24th did not include essential context regarding the relationship between the parties involved. We have been informed that Mr. Flores provided substantial financial support to the Jenkins-Flores household over a number of years. While the facts of the airport incident remain in dispute, we acknowledge that our reporting failed to meet editorial standards of fairness and completeness. No retraction. But the intent was clear. They had been warned. Dennis clipped the article, folded it beside the first, and placed them both in his binder. Exhibit 14. A few days later, Isabella's boutique announced an extended closure. Personal matters, the sign read in perfect script. The windows were still decorated, but the lights inside were off. Online, her social posts slowed, then stopped. The curated life she had built on borrowed elegance had begun to unravel. Cody's name disappeared from the leadership board of the Inland Northwest Business Leaders Association. Catherine's name vanished from the gala invitation committee for the regional hospital's annual fundraiser. These were not public firings. They were polite removals. Quiet exile. Michael called again 2 days later. He had sold the house. He and Isabella were moving into an apartment near the river. He did not ask for help. Just wanted his father to know. Dennis told him good luck. By the end of January, the snow began to melt. Dennis spent the mornings on the porch, wrapped in an old flannel jacket, drinking coffee and listening to the sound of the neighborhood slowly reawakening after the holiday frost. He fixed the broken fence, painted the hallway Maria used to walk through with bare feet and warm tea. He even replaced the ancient microwave with a newer one that did not hum like a dying fridge. One afternoon, he sat at his desk and reopened the binder, flipped through the exhibits, all the pages of sacrifice, all the receipts of dignity reclaimed. Then he closed it and filed it away. He had won, but more importantly, he had stopped losing. He spent more time with Rosa's family, joined them for Sunday dinners, birthday parties, lazy afternoons with nothing to celebrate but each other. The kids called him Uncle Dennis, even though he was not related by blood. He taught them how to make tortillas from scratch, how to use a tape measure, how to fix a drawer that stuck. One evening in March, Rosa handed him a beer on the back porch and asked if he ever missed it. "The house?" he asked. "No," she said. "The version of yourself that thought he had to buy, loved to keep it." Dennis chuckled, sipped his drink, and shook his head. Not even a little. The wind rustled the trees. The sky turned shades of gold and lavender. A new season was arriving, and with it, a version of life that had no room for shame, only honesty. As the stars came out, Dennis looked up and thought of Maria. He had given away years trying to hold on to something that had never been his. Now he held nothing but himself, and for the first time in decades, it felt like enough. March arrived like a quiet breath. The last of the snow had melted from the sidewalks, revealing patches of earth ready for spring. Trees in the neighborhood began to bud. Not fully green yet, but reaching. Dennis noticed. He had begun walking every morning again, the way he and Maria used to when the world still felt simple. It was during one of these walks that he found the envelope. It was tucked inside his mailbox, larger than usual, stamped with certified markings, and a return address from a legal firm he did not recognize. He carried it inside with the rest of the mail. Catalogs, a bill for the water heater repair, a coupon for lawn care services. The letter sat alone on the kitchen table while he fixed a cup of coffee. He stared at it for a long while before opening it. The contents were clean and sharp, a formal notice. Legal language, multiple signatures. Beneath all the decorum, one clear message. Cody and Catherine Jenkins were pursuing damages. They claimed public defamation, loss of social standing, and financial distress due to Dennis's actions. The dinner incident, the distribution of financial records, and the ensuing fallout had allegedly caused emotional suffering and reputational harm. They were suing him. Dennis laughed once, short, dry. He folded the letter carefully, returned it to the envelope, and placed it in the middle of the kitchen table. The steam from his coffee drifted upward in slow spirals, soft against the sharp corners of legal consequence. The audacity was not surprising. Cody had always been a man who believed image was everything. Catherine, a woman who thought her name was made of crystal. Of course they would respond to exposure by claiming victimhood. Of course they would dress up humiliation as injury. Dennis opened his laptop. He already had everything he needed. Every receipt, every transfer, every annotated copy of the newspaper article. every social media post showcasing the luxury they once paraded as earned. He drafted a reply to the law firm, respectful, brief, in possession of documentation, willing to counterclaim, ready for discovery. He hit print. When he walked the documents down to the local attorney's office 2 blocks away, he did not feel nerves. He felt relief. This was not a new battle. This was the final echo of the old one. Later that evening, Rosa stopped by with leftovers, tamales. Her kids had begged him to come over that weekend for movie night. She set the container on his counter and turned just in time to see the envelope. "Trouble?" she asked. "Not anymore," Dennis said. She read the letter in silence, her eyes narrowing at the names. "Let me guess," she said. "They want to stay clean while slinging mud." He nodded. Rosa smiled slowly. "Then maybe it is time they learn the difference between being embarrassed and being exposed." Dennis placed the envelope in his evidence binder. Exhibit 15. He spent the next week preparing the countersuit. Emotional distress, financial abuse, systematic exclusion, defamation. He gathered statements from people who had contacted him, screenshots of supportive messages, copies of letters from former colleagues and neighbors who had seen through the published lies. The binder swelled. By the following Monday, the legal process was in motion. He received a call from his assigned attorney, a woman named Grace with a calm, efficient voice and a fondness for facts. "You have more documentation than most of my clients manage in a year," she said. "Years of being invisible teaches you to keep records," Dennis replied. Grace promised to handle the filings and advised him not to respond directly to the Jenkinses or Isabella. "Let the court system do its work," Dennis agreed. Then, as he was about to hang up, she added something that surprised him. "You know, people around here remember what you did at that dinner. They talk about it, some quietly, some not so quietly. A lot of them say it was about time someone exposed how power actually works in this city." Dennis did not know how to respond, so he just said thank you and ended the call. That night he pulled out Maria's old recipe book and made her arroz con leche. The cinnamon filled the kitchen with the scent of memory. He ate in silence, savoring each bite like a prayer for what he had reclaimed. On Friday, a certified letter arrived from Isabella. It was short. No apology, just a proposal. "Drop the countersuit. Settle everything privately. Walk away." She offered $5,000 and an agreement of mutual silence. Dennis stared at the number. 5,000 after 200. 37,000 paid after years of emotional servitude. After being painted as unhinged in the city's newspaper, he placed the letter back in the envelope and returned it, unopened, to the mailbox with a note taped to the front. "Counteroffer. Dismiss your lawsuit. Apologize in writing. Stay quiet, or I'll see you in court." 2 days later, Grace called. The Jenkinses had withdrawn their suit. No public statement. No settlement. Just a quiet vanishing act. Dennis hung up the phone and walked out to his porch, breathing in the early spring air. It smelled like grass and thawing earth and something else, freedom. Later that evening he got another text from Michael. No words, just a photo. It showed a small, 2-bedroom apartment with a moving truck parked out front. Michael stood beside it, holding a cardboard box, his posture different now. Humbled. Human. Dennis stared at the photo for a long time, then put the phone down without replying. The following Sunday, Rosa's family gathered for dinner. The kids had drawn him pictures, stick-figure renditions of him holding hammers and baking trays. Rosa made pozole, and they played charades until one of the kids laughed so hard they had to take a break. Dennis sat in the living room afterward, watching the kids color and listening to the low hum of conversation in the kitchen. This was his life now, not perfect, but real and earned. The morning air hinted at something unfamiliar. Peace. Dennis stood at his kitchen window, cradling a mug between steady hands. Outside, the neighborhood stirred slowly. Children waited at the bus stop. A jogger passed by in rhythmic cadence. The city moved on, unconcerned with the private wars that had consumed him just weeks ago. He had grown accustomed to the silence. The absence of demands felt like a soft reward after years of noise. But even peace could be interrupted. The knock was soft, not urgent, not angry, just present. Dennis opened the door to find Michael standing on the porch, holding nothing but a folder and the weight of consequences. The confident lines of his posture had faded, replaced by something smaller and more human. His eyes carried the echoes of nights spent calculating more than money. He looked thinner, like a man who had stopped eating stress and started being devoured by it. Dennis stepped aside without a word. Michael entered slowly, like a guest unsure of his welcome. The house had changed. New furniture, fresh paint, signs of life no longer suspended by obligation. Michael's gaze lingered on the photo of Maria on the mantel, then drifted to the recliner Dennis had claimed as his own. He did not sit. He extended the folder, and Dennis took it wordlessly. Inside were pages written by hand, not fresh ones, but old. Letters from Maria, preserved carefully, her handwriting still dancing across the paper like she had just set down the pen. Dennis recognized them. They were the letters he had given Michael after the funeral. Michael had kept them, tucked away through years of detachment and denial. And at the very back, one new page dated 3 days ago. The message was simple. I am sorry. I know what I lost. I want to rebuild, if you will let me. Dennis read the line twice before setting the paper aside. The silence between them held no accusation, no promises, only the fragile beginnings of something not yet born. Michael looked around the room again, slower this time, as if committing the newness to memory. He noticed the rug that had been replaced. The lamp Dennis had rewired himself, signs that healing had already begun without him. The stillness stretched until Dennis motioned to the kitchen table. Michael sat, his hands clasped, the posture of a man who had nothing left to ask for, only things to offer. He spoke cautiously. Not in defense, not in plea, but in reflection. He told Dennis that the house was in foreclosure, that Isabella had moved out 2 weeks earlier, taking what little remained of their shared illusions. Cody and Catherine had stopped answering his calls. Whatever social capital they had once boasted had vanished after the Christmas dinner fallout. The network had closed its doors. The country club membership had been revoked. Even the bank where Michael had once applied for a managerial role had ghosted him after a background check revealed too much media attention for all the wrong reasons. Dennis listened. He did not interrupt. He did not nod. He simply observed the unraveling of entitlement. Michael described the calls he had made, the lawyers he had consulted, the jobs he had been rejected from. He admitted to delivering groceries through an app to stay afloat. For the first time in his life, he had stood at a stranger's doorstep and been judged by the logo on his shirt, not the title he claimed. But beyond the struggle, Michael had started to see. He spoke of Maria's letters, how he had reread them after Christmas, how she had warned of pride, how she had told him, years ago, that loyalty was not measured in comfort, but in courage. Dennis did not need to hear an apology. He had already heard the truth, and the truth was enough. He rose and walked to the mantel, retrieving another photo. One of Rosa's family at Easter seated around a table that felt like home. He handed it to Michael without explanation. Michael studied it, children smiling, plates filled, a place where Dennis had not needed to prove his worth. Michael handed it back. He said nothing, but something in his face shifted. Acceptance, maybe, or regret, or both. He looked older than he had in December, not just tired, but aged, shaped by consequence, forged by reality. And yet he had not come to beg. He had not asked for the mortgage to be reinstated. He had not offered repayment. He'd come with nothing except acknowledgement. Dennis returned to his seat and studied the man in front of him. Not the son he had raised, nor the stranger who had excluded him, but someone else. Someone who might still be worth knowing. He asked Michael what he planned to do. Michael said he was applying for union work. Something steady. Something honest. He was selling the house. He was staying in town. He had moved in with a former classmate who ran a small construction firm. He was trying to become someone Maria would have respected. Dennis considered this. Then he asked if Michael understood what forgiveness meant. Michael nodded slowly. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It did not mean erasing. It meant facing. It meant choosing presence over performance. It meant rebuilding on new ground, not patching over the cracks. Dennis stood and extended a hand. Michael took it. No promises passed between them. No dramatic declarations, just the quiet clasp of skin and time and shared blood. It was not a reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. They stood at the door. Michael said he would call next week. Dennis said he would answer. Then the door closed and the silence returned. Not empty now, but watchful, hopeful. patient. Later, Dennis poured a glass of whiskey and stepped out onto the porch. The air held the scent of spring pushing through winter's last grip. He looked out over the neighborhood where he had once been invisible in his generosity. Now he stood visible in his boundaries. He thought about what Michael had said, about Maria, about mistakes. He did not feel victorious. Revenge had not delivered triumph. It had delivered truth. It had stripped away illusion, exposed the rot, and cleared space for something real. And sometimes that was enough. He raised his glass toward the night sky, not in a toast to the past, but in recognition of the future. It would be different now, harder maybe, but his. And for the first time in years, Dennis Flores felt ready. Spring in Spokane arrived gently, as if paying tribute to the long winter's end. The trees along the street shifted from brittle gray to soft green, buds unfurling like the pages of a beloved novel. Dennis woke on that Sunday with sunlight slipping across his hardwood floors and the faint scent of budding tulips drifting through his open window. The world felt lighter, and so did he. He prepared coffee and watched the town come to life in silent celebration. Neighbors tended gardens. Children pedaled past with laughter tracing their tires. The world had moved forward while he had rebuilt his place in it. He walked to his bookshelf and retrieved the binder of evidence, the one thick with printed documents, notarized letters, red ink highlights, and simmering truth. He ran a hand across the spine. XX Exhibit 15. He slid it onto the bottom shelf, beneath years of mementos from lighter days. It would remain there, not for vengeance, but as proof that some wars do not need to rage forever to be won. By midday, he fixed a simple lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, Maria's favorite comfort combination. As he ate, the house felt full, not with people, but with something greater than obligation. Healing. He had stopped giving from holes he could not fill. He had stopped waiting for invitations to dinners where he felt like scenery. He had finally learned that belonging starts with earning his own space. That afternoon, his phone buzzed with a message from Michael. No words, just a photo of his modest new apartment, bright and furnished with purpose. A single cardboard box with writing in Michael's neat script, "Moving on." Dennis typed back a green heart and the words, "Proud of you." Monday morning brought the mailbox with a small envelope, sophisticatedly typed, an invitation he almost tossed aside out of habit. Community college guest lecture. The letter invited Dennis to speak to adult learners about personal finance, boundaries, and resilience. It cited examples of people deserving recognition not for wealth, but for integrity. He accepted. On Friday, he entered a simple classroom filled with attentive faces, people whose circumstances varied widely, but whose quiet needs for guidance were universal. He stood before them and spoke of invisible debts, of saying no when saying yes cost too much, and of reclaiming dignity when it felt like the price he paid for love. He shared how faulty silence built mortgage payments without memorials, and how courage to stop writing checks saved more than just funds. At the end, a single student raised her hand and said, "Thank you for reminding me value is not given, it is defined." The phrase echoed in Dennis's mind long after the applause faded. Spring deepened. He spent evenings repairing his porch, painting the hallway his wife used to walk, and replacing the light on the front steps. Each small correction felt like closing a chapter in progress, not rewriting words already written. One evening he stood beneath the glowing lamp and thought of Maria. Not with sorrow, but with gratitude for the years they had. Not enough, but enough. On Sundays, his schedule filled with real invitations. Rose's family dinners, school projects on display, backyard barbecues that needed no proof of affection. He laughed with children who insisted he tell them stories about Christmases long before they were born. They listened with wide eyes, not because he had lost much, but because he had found enough to give. Summer approached with soft gold evenings. One evening, Dennis opened the front gate to find Michael waiting with a pitcher of lemonade and a plate of fresh cornbread. They sat in rocking chairs on the porch, sunlight filtering through leaves dense and green. They did not speak much. Sometimes presence says more than words. Michael stood at dusk and said quietly, "I got a job with a construction team. Steady pay, honest work. I want to be useful again." Dennis nodded, not proud but certain. He held out his hand. "That's enough." That fall, leaves turned bright and drifted across his lawn. Dennis fixed the fence post he had started replacing in spring, each nail pressed not in anger but in memory. in persistence, in knowing that effort needs no recognition to be meaningful. He gathered the evidence binder and placed it in a box labeled Archive. No index, just stored away. A reminder that sometimes closure is about putting things behind you, not carrying them forward. He looked at the box and whispered, "Thank you." Never again that winter Christmas arrived again. He did not string lights this time. Instead, he drove to Rosa's house to help hang wreaths for her children. Laughter filled the living room. He listened to stories of school plays and whether tamales were better than cookies. He felt valued, not bank balance valued, heart valued. Late that night, as he lay in bed, he reflected on the journey. He had started from bitter rejection and public unraveling. He had navigated legal threats and emotional estrangement. He had faced foreclosure on more than just a mortgage, on belonging, on memory, on identity, and he had chosen to keep walking, step by step, word by word, truth by truth. He closed his eyes and dreamed of spring again, trees in bloom, voices in welcome, a chair in a home that scented of laughter, not ledger entries. He understood now that epilogues need not be grand. They can be quiet and steady. They can be earned in peace, not demanded with noise. That was his ending. Soft, whole. Enough. If this story stayed with you, sit with it a little longer. Not every ending needs fireworks. Some just need closure, like if you've ever had to reclaim your peace quietly. Subscribe for more true stories of dignity and resolve. Comment below. Have you ever forgiven someone without letting them back in? And tell me, where are you watching from?